Welcome back. Today we're in chapter 18, published April 9th, 2022. The neighbor just started mowing as soon as I started this, so hopefully you can't hear it. Chapter 18. The third, my big brother. The one with the unfortunate luck of being raised by our mother. Not that our mother is inherently bad. On the contrary. As a child, she was neglected and abused repeatedly by the people around her. She, too, had an alcoholic mother, and her mother had an alcoholic mother. She had nowhere to turn and found drugs and alcohol as her savior. This is how she describes it. She was suicidal and homicidal, and the drugs and alcohol saved her from those two paths. She found herself pregnant at 20 years old, the father wanting nothing to do with the baby. After Rena's passing, I found my purpose at the greenhouse waning. It had come out that men with the same education and the same experience were being paid significantly more than the women. It was time to go. I was immediately offered a new job where I was paid nearly twice what I had been making. It was a pretty empowering time as far as the material world was concerned. I didn't have to worry anymore about the power being shut off, having to make it into some sort of fun game for my daughter so that she wouldn't have to worry. All of our bills were paid on time, and I was even able to provide her with some of our own vacation memories. It felt like such a blessing. I was still going to meetings and still being a human, making mistakes and doing some things right, too. Externally, it was a busy time. Internally, I was quiet, still grieving Betsy, and now Rena and John. Also, always when the busyness stopped, he was there, like a phantom, haunting my life. My older brother is someone that I always looked up to from afar. He has one of the most intelligent minds I have ever encountered in my lifetime. The way he carries himself is always upright with his head high, not in a cocky way, in a way that leaves the impression of lessons learned and knowledge gained. For the people closest to him, myself included, the word honorable comes to mind. We were not always close per se in our everyday lives. He is 10 years older than me, and we grew up in different households after my dad left. I know that my dad wished that he could have taken him with us, but he wasn't his biological father. There was nothing he could do. I lived with my mother sporadically throughout my addiction, and sometimes my brother would be living with her at the same time. He really couldn't stomach me then. I'm guessing because of everything he went through as a child. For a number of years, he walked the path of crime in other ways, not at all knowing how to process the trauma he experienced in his own life. I recently learned that, like my mother, he too was brutalized as a child. Brutalized in every way a child can be. No exaggeration. As the chains in this side of the family continued to link. When I was 15, I woke up one day on a couch at a friend's house. I had a horrible hangover. The sun was just starting to come up, and the birds had just started chirping. The TV was on low, and the news was on. Suddenly, my brother was on the screen. He was in an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs, being led somewhere by an officer. I kept blinking, thinking it must be a dream. It wasn't. He would spend 2 years in jail that time. While he was in there, he seemed to have gotten the help that he needed. He found God and was determined to live a good life and take responsibility for his actions. He worked his way through the obstacles of being a convicted felon and eventually got a good job making decent money. He married a woman who came from a wonderful family, and they loved him. Together, they had a son. For the first time in his life, he experienced unconditional love and what a family environment was like. Though the marriage ultimately failed, being a father to his son was the most important thing to him. He never wanted that little boy to go through any of what he went through in this life. He was determined there too. As I got and stayed sober, we became close in a way that, even though we didn't see each other all the time, we each knew we could count on the other if we ever needed it. There was love. He would come to my daughter's birthday parties, and we would attend his son's. He had met another woman who had a child of her own. They appeared content and in love, forging their own family. I received a text from my brother one day. He told me that he had cancer and the treatments were getting bad. He said that he needed help with his dogs, and I was the only person he could trust. It was an honor to hear that he trusted me in that way after all we had been through, but I was confused. I had seen him 2 months prior at my daughter's roller skating party, and he looked great. I had no idea that he was so sick. Shortly after, I went to his apartment to visit him. He was not well. It was painful to see. He could no longer eat and was going to need to undergo surgery to get a feeding tube inserted. This once big guy, covered in tattoos, now weak and soft spoken, worried for his son, sad to be separated from his dogs, scared of what was going to happen. With the future uncertain, very little matters. A few days later, he and his girlfriend brought the dogs to our home. We spent some time together that day, and we each cried while trying to remain optimistic. When he completed the chemotherapy and radiation, he needed another surgery to remove all the infected lymph nodes. It was a big deal and would determine the course of his future. I was in contact with his girlfriend and was heading to the hospital that morning. I remember that it was warm out, but dark and pouring down rain. As I walked to my car, there was a baby bunny lying next to the sidewalk, shivering uncontrollably and getting soaked. When viewing their physical attributes, the rabbit comes to represent a prayerful life as it puts its paws in prayer position each time they wash their faces. I tried to dry him off and keep him warm. I ran to the nearest pet store and bought him a bottle. I fed him and placed him in a large box with towels to snuggle. A part of me wanted to stay with him, but I couldn't. I had to get to my brother. When I arrived at the hospital, his girlfriend was sitting there anxiously. He had been under for hours and hours with no word on his condition. I always liked her, but this is when I loved her. Finally, the surgeon called. He said that my brother was okay and the surgery was successful. She immediately started sobbing in relief. I could feel the love pouring out of her. It was beautiful. When I arrived home late that night, I found that the baby bunny had not survived. Some time passed, and my brother started to get stronger, little by little. He talked to me about marrying his girlfriend. Initially, it was not something he wanted, as he already had one failed marriage. However, after being together for years, it was something that she wanted badly. After he saw the way she stood by his side through cancer, he proposed. They were married a short time later in an intimate ceremony at a chapel. I don't think there was a dry eye in the place. If there were ever two people deserving and destined for a happy ending, it felt as if it was them. At the reception, I remember the heartfelt joy permeating the space, their children laughing. After all he had pulled through in life, to see him beside a woman I knew loved him was a gift to behold. I was so deeply happy for my brother. The echo of the laughter, a recurring thought that's hard to make sense of now. Chapter 18. It just makes my stomach hurt to take in this chapter. And I was kind of dreading it because some things you just wish. I wish I knew then what I know now. I wish I could have seen the future then and changed the course of some lives. But I can't. So it's just a very powerless, sad feeling. And he's not mowing, he's blowing. um, Let me pause. Sorry about that, guys. There's a lot here, so I really want to finish my thoughts. If you've already read my story or you know it, then you have an idea of what I'm saying. I want to tell you what I've heard, what I always heard growing up about my brother. And what people would say. You know, in my area, he was pretty notorious because he was this big guy with a lot of tattoos and a lot of anger and a lot of um, violent tendencies and just not just something was wrong. Like something was always wrong. But the characters in that side of my family would just say, "Oh, he's too much. He's out of control. He's blah blah blah." And then under the surface, you you start hearing other things, other pieces of the puzzle because those closest to the situation, they're not saying they're not talking about the abuse that he endured that led to the actions that he was doing, right? They're not saying, "Oh, I knew that he was being molested by so and so, and I didn't fucking do anything. I knew that he was sleeping in a car outside of a bar for days on end, but I didn't do anything." If they were to say those true things, then they would have to acknowledge their own part and not doing anything about it, right? So when I think of my brother, I think of this little boy. I think of the stories of like this 11-year-old in the 6th grade stabbing himself in the head with pencils. And how could nobody see that something was really fucking wrong? Something was really fucking wrong. How could nobody see that or do anything? And these are the types of rabbit holes I personally go down. I don't like to go down them. It's so fucking dark. But is it better to stick my head in the sand like everybody else in this situation? Is that better? Is that helping the next generation? Is that making any positive changes? No. So yeah, he went through all that shit as a child. And that makes me feel sick and horrified for him. There goes Henry. But the truth is, there's no one to blame. There's no one to blame. The people who inflicted the pain also received the pain, and they had no other choice but to give it to my brother and to give it to others. And this is why I'm so passionate about talking about these things, because we're doing it. We're doing it to ourselves. We're doing it to our children. And when we see a child and don't do anything about it, we are siding with the abuser, right? Like, it's so logical to me that it makes me want to freak out because, of course, it's all of our faults. And my heart bleeds too for my brother. He really was determined. And if you read the chapter, you see I italicize the word determined because determination is fine. It's fine. It's a good thing. It can light your fire for a little bit and keep you going. However, the demons only stay quiet for so long. If you don't deal with that shit and you don't know it, you don't know yourself, you don't know your story, it will only take one thing to unleash those demons. And that's a scary thing. And we all have them in one form or another. We all have those places that we're afraid to look. But to not look is a major disservice to yourself and to the people around you. And that's putting it lightly. But you can only reach those who are ready to be reached, right? So I'll take my bleeding heart and I'll continue what I'm doing in the hopes of someone finding it who really needs it. Because we don't have to live like this. So, thank you. Thanks for listening. And we'll see you next week for chapter 19. Bye, guys.